They thought they could pin it on him, a teenager, scared and alone, facing a false accusation from a cop. But what happened in that courtroom stunned everyone. You won't believe how justice turned the tables. Imagine being a 16-year-old, accused of a crime you didn't commit. All eyes on you, and the person accusing you? A police officer. That's exactly what happened to David, a quiet kid with no criminal record. What started as a false accusation spiraled into a legal battle that left the courtroom in disbelief. And by the end of it, the truth shook everyone to their core. David was an ordinary kid living in a quiet suburban neighborhood. He loved video games, math, and hanging out with his dog, Max. He wasn't the type to get into trouble. His grades were good, his teachers liked him, and he had never even been late to class. But one fateful evening changed everything. It started when David was walking home from his friend's house after a late-night study session. The streets were dimly lit, the air cool and quiet. He was scrolling through his phone when, out of nowhere, flashing blue and red lights illuminated the street. A police car pulled up beside him. The officer, a stern-looking man named Officer Roberts, stepped out and approached him. "Where were you just now?" Roberts demanded. David was confused but polite. "I was at my friend's house studying for our math test." Roberts didn't seem convinced. He started asking more questions, his tone growing sharper with each one. Then came the bombshell accusation. "We got a call about a robbery at the convenience store down the street. You matched the description." David's heart sank. "What? I didn't—" But before he could finish, Roberts told him to turn around and put his hands behind his back. David tried to explain, but his words fell on deaf ears. The officer was adamant, claiming that a witness had identified David as the suspect. As David sat in the back of the police car, he felt his world crumbling. How could this happen? He hadn't done anything wrong. David was taken to the police station, where he was interrogated for hours. Despite his repeated pleas of innocence, the officers wouldn't budge. They had evidence tying him to the crime, a blurry security camera image of someone wearing a hoodie similar to his. David's parents arrived at the station, horrified and confused. His mother, Sarah, demanded answers. "My son is not a criminal. He's never even gotten a detention." But the officers insisted they had a case. David was charged with robbery and released on bail, but the damage was done. News spread quickly in their small community, and whispers followed David wherever he went. "Did you hear about David? Never thought he'd be the type. I always knew something was off about him." At school, the stares were unbearable. His friends avoided him, and even some teachers seemed to look at him differently. David felt like he was drowning in a sea of judgment and doubt. But the worst part? The officer who accused him was confident, almost smug, about his case. Officer Roberts was known in the community as a tough but fair cop. People trusted him, which made it even harder for anyone to believe David's side of the story. As the court date approached, David's family hired a lawyer, Ms. Elena Carter. She was sharp, compassionate, and determined to prove David's innocence. Ms. Carter immediately started digging into the case. She reviewed the so-called evidence and found it to be flimsy at best. The security footage was grainy and unclear, and the witness's statement was vague and inconsistent. "This case is weak," she told David. "We just need to prove it in court." But David wasn't convinced. "What if no one believes me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Carter placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "The truth has a way of coming out, David. You just have to trust me." The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. Friends, family, and curious onlookers filled the benches, all eager to see how this shocking case would unfold. David sat at the defendant's table, his hands trembling slightly. He could feel the weight of every gaze, the judgment in every pair of eyes. Officer Roberts took the stand first. He recounted his version of events with confidence, describing how David matched the suspect's description and was acting suspiciously when he was stopped. Next came the witness, an elderly man who claimed he saw someone running from the convenience store. But under cross-examination, Ms. Carter skillfully dismantled his testimony. "Did you see the suspect's face clearly?" she asked. "Well, no, it was dark," the man admitted. "Did you notice anything distinctive about the suspect? Any scars, tattoos, anything like that?" "No, not really, just the hoodie." Ms. Carter turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client is being accused based on nothing more than the fact that he was wearing a hoodie. This is not justice." But the real turning point came when David himself took the stand. He was nervous but determined. He described his evening in detail, explaining how he had been at his friend's house studying and had nothing to do with the robbery. Ms. Carter then presented evidence that changed everything. A GPS record from David's phone showing that he was miles away from the convenience store at the time of the crime. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the evidence was displayed. Officer Roberts shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confidence faltering. Finally, Ms. Carter delivered her closing argument. "David is not a criminal. He is an innocent young man whose life has been upended by a rush to judgment. Let's not allow a good kid to become a victim of a broken system." The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, the verdict was clear. Not guilty. David collapsed into his mother's arms, tears streaming down his face. The weight of the world lifted from his shoulders as the courtroom erupted into applause. But this wasn't just a victory for David. It was a wake-up call for everyone who had doubted him, for everyone who had been so quick to judge. Officer Roberts left the courtroom without a word, his reputation tarnished. And as David walked out, head held high, he knew he was no longer just a scared kid defending himself. He was proof that the truth always prevails. David's story is a powerful reminder of why we must question assumptions and stand up for the truth. It's a call to be vigilant against injustice, to listen, and to believe in the power of evidence over prejudice. Have you ever been falsely accused or felt like no one believed you? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you overcame it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge the way we see the world.